socialstudiesgames.us, Unit 7, Video 4, as always, based on the AP History Guidelines. Today, I can define eugenics, and I can predict the consequences of bad science. When we rewind the clock 100 years ago, it is a segregated society. We're not talking about unequal. We're not talking about racist, although it is unequal and it is racist, but it's at its height. Segregated society is where you have black places and white places, and legally you cannot go between the two. If you're an African American or a black American, these are the stores that you can go to, these are the places that you can go to, and all the businesses are this way, the schools are this way, everything in the economy is this way, and even the federal government is this way. Completely segregated. Know it. Before we talk about eugenics, we've got to talk about a concept or some science that'll help you understand the problems of eugenics, and it'll also help you do research going forward. Because look, eugenics was a disaster, a major mistake that could have easily been prevented had people just followed the simple basic rules of science that I'm going to tell you now. There are going to be a lot of ideas that will be proposed during your lifetime, or suggestions, or just analysis of people doing research, and they'll say, hey, look, we checked out this research, here's what's happening. You have to make sure that you do not confuse correlation and causation. What's correlation? Correlation is a mutual relationship or a connection between two or more things. Let's show you. So let's look at thing A and thing B. For example, as attendance at school drops, so does achievement. This is a correlation. There are two things. There's a relationship between the two. When people stop going to school, yeah, so do grades. They start to drop down. When enrollment at colleges decreases, then their number of teachers decreases. Sure, yeah, that could happen. If there's less people in college, there's going to be less people graduating. And so sure, some of those are going to be teachers. As a student's study time increases, so do the test averages. There's a correlation, not a causation. We're going to talk about that in a second. A correlation. When this happens, this tends to happen. When A happens, B tends to happen. The more years of education you complete, the higher your potential earnings will be. Yeah, it makes sense. Those things should correlate or happen together is what we're saying. Very important that you understand this when you're doing research and you're trying to make predictions and you're trying to understand what has happened, what is happening, and what might happen in all sorts of fields: business, economics, in society, at school, in your life, in your own actions. College students with higher SAT scores also have higher grades in college. When A often happens, B tends to happen. But we are not saying, but, remember, there's always a but. We are not saying that A causes B. That does not say that. This is a correlation. A does not necessarily cause B. It could, but there could also be a lot of other factors happening. Let's look at this specifically. So again, correlation does not mean causation. They're two separate things. Correlation says when A happens, B tends to happen. Causation says A causes B. We are not saying that here. When attendance drops, so does achievement. Sure, maybe, but there could be other things causing achievement to drop. When a student's study time increases, so do the test averages. Sure, that could be it, but also it could be, well, the student is studying more. That might mean the student is already pretty smart. That's why they're studying more, and that's why the average is going up. It's not because they're studying more. It's just because they're smarter students. There could be other factors causing the test average. Maybe they just have a really good teacher. Maybe they change the school day to make it more efficient and more effective. There could be a lot of changes that happen that are actually sending the test averages up. Nowhere, we don't know. We would have to do more research and go through more studies and different variables. And eventually over time you can figure out, okay, this is what's causing it. But a lot of times at first we just find correlations. We say, well, these tend to happen together, but they're not necessarily causing each other. Let's look at it again. Let's say we study students and we say, oh, the attendance is terrible. Oh, their scores are terrible. Looks like as attendance drops, so does achievement. Looks like. We don't know for sure. It means we probably should look into this more. We should have more studies. We should study other students across the country. And if we do enough studies and we do enough research and it keeps coming up and coming up and coming up this way, then yeah, that probably is causation. But right now, it's just correlation. This happens and then this happens. But why is that so important? We're going to talk about it in a second, because there could be other variables. It could not, maybe it's income, maybe it's IQ of those students that was causing the achievement. Maybe it's the student's behavior. Maybe it has nothing to do with their attendance. Maybe they just are crazy kids. Maybe it's because the kids that you're studying come from single parent homes. Maybe it's the environment that they live in that's causing their achievement to drop. Maybe it's just racism that they're dealing with. Maybe they have health issues. It could be a lot of things. All of these things could correlate. A happens, B happens. A happens, B happens. A happens, B happens. But that does not mean A causes B. Why is that important? Because often with the research, the government or some sort of entity or person will look at it and say, well, attendance drops, so does achievement. I know what we got to do. We've got to force the kids to go to school. Perfect example. So let's say, and this is actually happening today. One of the presidential candidates, Kamala Harris, she's criticized. Some people support her for this, but she is very much a proponent of students have to be in school. So what she probably would have done is said, look, our students' achievements dropping, so is their attendance. The reason must be their attendance. And she's known for, if you miss school, your parents are getting arrested. And that's pretty common. A lot of schools do that. So if we are going to single out Kamala Harris, we need to be honest and say, look, that's a common practice throughout the country. When your attendance goes through the roof, a lot of schools around the country, or through the roof, I said, you're missing too many days, your parents are often taken to court and sometimes arrested. The problem with this policy is, we don't know that it's attendance that's causing the achievement to drop. There's just a correlation. And we shouldn't arrest parents if there's only if we knew that attendance causes a drop, then yeah, maybe you would be right. So maybe your actions would be justified. But if it's just a correlation, you might arrest the parents and you find out, oh no, it was just because the kids were dealing with racism. Now the problem's worse because mom's in jail. So that's why, if you see correlation, that's good, that's interesting. We need to learn more or think more about it. But your actions, there's not much that you can do just yet. So William Galton, is it William Galton? Francis Galton. I'm sorry, Francis Galton will do a research study. He'll write about it in his book called Hereditary Genius. And what he will find is, now this is coming from Thomas Sowell's book here, Intellectuals and Race. He will find that high achievers were concentrated in particular families. They'll do the research and find out, oh, look at these people who seem to have success, and it's coming from specific families. They find a correlation between specific families and money and wealth and success. And they look at the two, A and B, right? A happens and then B happens. It's a correlation. It's not causation. And you'll find that, oh, these particular families, specifically white, Anglo-Saxon, Western European families, are successful. So he then says, you know what? Forget this correlation is not causation. This is causation. And he takes it a step further, right? He jumps and says, oh, no, this is what's causing it. And he says, instead of white people are tending to be more successful at this time, he says they're more successful because they're white. He's saying that their whiteness, their white genetic genes are the reason why they are superior and they're successful and they're better than everyone else. That is bad science. That is not something we need to do. Now, that's so much worse than misinterpreting attendance affecting achievement. This is really, really bad stuff. And this really, really happened. And so what happens is we misinterpret it and then we spread it to everyone around the country like, yep, that's right. That's what's happening. No. It was just that these people were successful and that's it. These white people at that time, there's a lot of variables at play that they probably should have looked at, but they didn't. They said, oh, well, these particular families are successful. It must be because these particular families are genetically superior. That's why they're successful. And then they say, basically, anyone that's black or many of the immigrants from other countries around the world, they're inferior. They don't have those genes, thus they are not successful. So we take what was correlation and we misinterpret it as causation. His white genes did not make him successful. It was probably something else. Maybe it was being born to a rich family. Maybe it was just born actually being white in a society that was very racist. Maybe it was the fact that he spoke English and the immigrants don't speak English. Maybe it's that he grew up in a better place in town. Maybe it's that he had access to education. Could have been all those things. But what it probably wasn't, what it was not, and this is scientifically proven, it's not his genes. He did not have superior genes. White people do not have superior genes. There is not a genetic advantage. It's bogus science. But nonetheless, many Americans, basically the whole country, believed in this nonsense, and it started with the simple mistake of misinterpreting correlation for causation. And this is bad science. Bad science. And you probably will never, hopefully never see a situation like this again, where people misinterpret correlation and causation and have such a tragic impact on society. And this is bad science. This will lead to racism and a bunch of big problems. So technically, what is eugenics? That's what eugenics is created because of Mr. Galton and his research study where he finds out, oh, well, white people tend to be more successful. It must be because they're white. Whoa, that's a big jump, buddy. But he did it anyway. So this is a pseudoscience. Whenever you hear pseudoscience, we're basically saying fake science of improving a human population by controlled breeding. Sounds like dogs, doesn't it? Controlled breeding, but that's what you do with animals where you have two dogs and you want to make sure that they're specifically bred. You breed them together and you know what you're going to get when they have a child. So this is the same thing where you say, well, let's take all the smart people and make sure that they breed and have children. So we have even more smart people. We make sure the smart people keep breeding and breeding and breeding. And this will increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics, like what you do with dogs. You're trying to increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics. I want this dog to be strong, so let's breed two strong dogs together. And that's what you do over time, and you get very, very strong dogs. And I hate comparing humans to dogs, but I mean, this is the basic genetic breeding, the same thing. This was developed by Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, besmirching his name, riding his coattails. But hey, that's, sometimes you got a famous cousin, you try to get your in here, and unfortunately this guy gets his in here, and like, oh, this guy's Darwin's cousin, so he must know what he's talking about. No, he doesn't. This is bad, people. No one listened to him, but they listened to him, unfortunately. And he developed this as a method of improving the human race, right? They're trying to create a step toward a super race. This probably sounds really ridiculous to you. Like, who would believe? Look, there's a lot of bad science that we believe today, and there's a lot of mistakes that we fall for today. And a lot of times we fall for these because we confuse correlation and causation. When A happens, B happens. But that does not mean A caused B. So we had white people that were successful. White people, and they were successful. And we think, well, it must be because they're white that they're successful. So you know what? We just need a bunch of white people. No, that's not what we need to do. And this gets really bad because let me highlight some of these words on here and show you what we're talking about. So, step towards a super race. How do we do it? Sterilization. What is sterilization? Getting real serious on it. That's where we sterilize people and we make it impossible through surgery. We make it impossible for people to breed. We take away men, mainly men and women, and we take away their ability to reproduce. I'm not going to go into the gory, horrific details of how this is done, but you should now know how one is sterilized. And this is law. This is the government stepping in and selecting certain people and saying, you need to be sterilized because we don't like your genes. We don't want them to reproduce because we are considering you the imbecile. We are considering you to be the moron. This is why I probably should not have used that word idiot the other day. The idiot, the medium imbecile. So what the government says is we don't need these people in our country dragging us down. So our goal is to sterilize the people that we don't seem to, that we deem unfit. And we will make sure that only the white people or the Anglo-Saxons reproduce and create a strong genetic family tree based on eugenics. So no reproduction of the inferior race, only the strong white man. This is crazy. And this is hard to believe that we were sterilizing people and refusing their right to reproduce. And it wasn't just blacks, but it was a lot of blacks in this country. And it was also immigrants. Now, the reason why an immigrant may not be as successful as the white person at first in America is because they didn't speak English, or they were coming from different cultures, or they were coming from cultures that did not necessarily encourage education or didn't have the same values. So on the surface, it may have looked like, oh, you're backwards, or oh, you're not as successful or as strong as me. Well, that's because I'm switching from a culture. But over time, as I adapt and assimilate to your culture, then we will be the same. But racists didn't want to hear that. They wanted to believe that the white Anglo-Saxon, meaning mainly from Western Europe, was superior. It was a super race. It had the best genes. And by the way, look, we got the science. Galton did the study. Galton proved it. Go back. We've got the research. We're not just doing it because we're racist. We are scientists. No, you're not. This is bogus science. You're confusing correlation and causation. Only healthy seeds must be sown. You know what he's saying here? You know what he's saying here. Only healthy seeds must be sown. Check the seeds of hereditary diseases, unfitness by eugenics. And so people who were disabled or had disabilities, those were also said, no, you cannot reproduce. We only want a master race. This might, if you know a lot about history, or are familiar with 20th century history, American history, and world history, this may sound a lot like the ideas of some other dude that was really, really bad that we talk about, and he's a horrible, horrible guy. And you're thinking, but we didn't do that, did we? Yeah, we kind of started that. So here again, you have the idea of we have the dark complexion, we have the light complexion, and you have the different genetic. These are all pamphlets that were supported. These were books that were released and encouraged people. This isn't just some crazy, just some guy's idea on the internet. This was publicated everywhere. This was promoted everywhere. We had presidents that believed in this. This is not wackos on the internet that believed in eugenics. The president believed in eugenics. The presidents believed in eugenics. They believed in this. Now, I'm not going to defend what they believed in. It is possible that some decent people fell for this because, well, you told me it was science, and they never really looked into it. But I'm going to have a hard time defending them. And you can see the states throughout the country where these sterilizations occurred. And you can see in North Carolina, we have markers that, I guess, honor or lament the fact that the state was sterilizing people. Over 7,600 people between 1933 and 1973 were sterilized in North Carolina because they were deemed unfit, and their right to reproduce was taken away because our society was worried, well, if you have kids, they're going to be a drain on our economy. They're going to be a drain on our society, and we're going to have to spend all of our money to take care of them. So you shouldn't have any kids. This is incredibly offensive. This is incredibly terrible. And this whole idea of eugenics never had to happen. But it all happens because of bad science and racism, the combination of the two. Now, that still happens today. We have big issues with that today. But another bigger takeaway is don't confuse correlation with causation. So hopefully you understand what eugenics is. It was this selective breeding program where mainly we sterilized people and told them other people out of racism that couldn't breed. And can you predict the consequences of bad science? Do you know the event that will occur or at least be deeply influenced by this idea of a master race and where you try to exterminate a specific type of race? We're talking about World War II. And I don't know if I can use specific words on YouTube anymore because you get banned, but there's a bad guy during World War II. Eventually, we're going to have to make these videos. There's a bad guy during World War II. He had a funny mustache. And let me see if I can draw his picture here. This is what he looks like. A little mustache. That's what he looked like. You know who I'm talking? I don't know if you can say these words. I'm eventually going to have to cross this bridge when we get there, but I don't want to do it right now. I don't want to get this body. Well, you only get demonetized, and I'm not making any money off these videos anyway. But eventually, eugenics, this idea that there is a master race based on bogus science, but they look at the bogus science and say, oh, there's a master race, so everyone else is inferior. We need to get rid of them. And that's going to lead to the Nazis and the Holocaust, in which 11 million, those numbers may have changed, but I'm going to go ahead and go with 11 million Jews were exterminated through a genocide. And guess what? Unfortunately, maybe that doesn't ever happen if it wasn't for the progressives in America at the turn of the century that promoted this idea, that promoted, oh yeah, I looked at the science. What we need to do is selective breeding, and only the smart and successful and strong people should breed. Not true. Bogus science. There's nothing to this. Do not listen to anyone that tries to tell you that, well, actually, no, there is no actually to this. It's not going to happen. Get out of here with that. It's racism. It's bad science.